bit of a content warning. Not only is this written in the 20s, but it also brings about some of that language, dispositions, and recollections of various peoples and cultural groups. H.P. Lovecraft was a character, and that character was not always becoming of one who is so capable of phenomenal prose and even some poetic verse. The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. Narrated by Kairos of the Threefold Manifold. 17th of September, 2024. Published in Beyond the Wall of Sleep, Sauk City, Wisconsin. Arkham House, 1943. Pages 76 through 134. Part 1 of 3. 3 times Randolph Carter dreamed of the marvelous city, and 3 times was he snatched away while he still paused on the high terrace above it. All golden and lovely it blazed in the sunset, with walls, temples, colonnades, and arched bridges of veined marble, silver-basined fountains of prismatic spray in broad squares, and perfumed gardens and wide streets marching between delicate trees, and blossom-laden urns and ivory statues in gleaming rows, while on steep northward slopes climbed tiers of red roofs and old peaked gables harboring little lanes of grassy cobbles. It was a fever of the gods, a fanfare of supernal trumpets, and a clash of immortal cymbals. Mystery hung about it, as clouds about a fabulous unvisited mountain, and as Carter stood breathless and expectant on that balustraded parapet, there swept up to him the poignancy and suspense of almost vanished memory, the pain of lost things, and the maddening need to place again what once had been an awesome and momentous place. He knew that for him, its meaning must once have been supreme, though in what cycle or incarnation he had known it, or whether in dream or in waking, he could not tell. Vaguely, it called up glimpses of a far-forgotten first youth, when wonder and pleasure lay in all the mystery of days, and dawn and dusk alike strode forth prophetic to the eager sound of lutes and song, unclosing fiery gates towards further and surprising marvels. But each night, as he stood on that high marble terrace with the curious urns and carven rail, and looked off over that hushed sunset city of beauty and unearthly imminence, he felt the bondage of dreams, tyrannous gods. For in no wise could he leave that lofty spot, or descend the wide marmoreal flights flung endlessly down to where those streets of elder witchery lay outspread and beckoning. When for the 3rd time he awakened with those flights still undescended and those hushed sunset streets still untraversed, he prayed long and earnestly to the hidden gods of dream that brood capricious above the clouds on unknown Kadath, in the cold waste where no man treads. But the gods made no answer and shewed no relenting, nor did they give any favoring signs when he prayed to them in dream and invoked them sacrificially through the bearded priests of Nasht and Kamanta, whose cavern temple with its pillar of flame lies not far from the gates of the waking world. It seemed, however, that his prayers must have been adversely heard, for after even the first of them he ceased wholly to behold the marvelous city, as if 3 glimpses from afar had been mere accidents or oversights, and against some hidden plan or wish of the gods. At length, sick with longing for those glittering sunset streets and cryptical hill lanes among ancient tiled roofs, nor able sleeping or waking to drive them from his mind, Carter resolved to go with bold entreaty whither no man had gone before, and dare the icy deserts through the dark to where unknown Kadath, veiled in cloud and crowned with unimagined stars, holds secret and nocturnal the onyx castle of the Great Ones. In light slumber, he descended the 70 steps to the cavern of flame and talked of his design to the bearded priests, Nasht and Kamanta, and the priests shook their skint-bearing heads and vowed it would be the death of his soul. They pointed out that the Great Ones had shown already their wish, and that it is not agreeable to them to be harassed by insistent pleas. They reminded him, too, that not only had no man ever been to Kadath, but no man had ever suspected in what part of space it may lie, whether it be in the Dreamlands around our own world, or in those surrounding some unguessed companion of Fomalhaunt or Aldebaran. If in our dreamland it might be conceivably reached, but only 3 human souls since time began had ever crossed and recrossed the black, impious gulfs to other dreamlands, and of that 3, 2 had come back quite mad. There were in such voyages incalculable local dangers as well as that shocking final peril which gibbers unmentionably outside the ordered universe where no dreams reach, that last amorphous blight of nethermost confusion which blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity, the boundless daemon Sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud, and who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable unlighted chambers beyond time, amidst the muffled, maddening beating of vile drums and the thin, monotonous whine of accursed flutes, to which detestable pounding and piping dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, tenebrous, mindless, other gods, whose soul and messengers the crawling chaos, Nyarlathotep. Of these things was Carter warned by the priests of Nasht and Kamanta in the cavern of flame, but still he resolved to find the gods of unknown Kadath in the cold waste, wherever that might be, and to win from them the sight and remembrance and shelter of the marvelous sunset city. He knew that his journey would be strange and long, and that the Great Ones would be against it, but being old in the land of dream, he counted on many useful memories and devices to aid him. So asking a formal blessing of the priests and thinking shrewdly on his course, he boldly descended the 700 steps to the gate of deeper slumber, and set out through the enchanted wood. In the tunnels of that twisted wood, whose low prodigious oaks twine groping boughs and shine dim with the phosphorescence of strange fungi, dwell the furtive and secretive Zoogs, who know many obscure secrets of the dream world and a few of the waking world, since the wood at 2 places touches the lands of men, though it would be disastrous to say where. Certain unexplained rumors, events, and vanishments occur among men where the Zoogs have access, and it is well that they cannot travel far outside the world of dreams. But over the nearer parts of the dream world they pass freely, flitting small and brown and unseen, and bearing back piquant tales to beguile the hours around their hearts in the forest they love. Most of them live in burrows, but some inhabit the trunks of the great trees, and although they live mostly on fungi, it is muttered that they have also a slight taste for meat, either physical or spiritual, for certainly many dreamers have entered that wood who have not come out. Carter, however, had no fear, for he was an old dreamer, and had learnt their fluttering language and made many a treaty with them, having found through their help the splendid city of Celephais, in Ut Nargai, beyond the Tanarian hills, where reigns half the year the great King Kuranes, a man he had known by another name in life. Kuranes was the one soul who had been to the Star Goals and returned free from madness. Threading now the low phosphorescent aisles between those gigantic trunks, Carter made fluttering sounds in the manner of the Zoogs and listened now and then for responses. He remembered one particular village of the creatures was in the center of the wood, where a circle of great mossy stones in what was once a clearing tells of older and more terrible dwellers long forgotten, and toward this spot he hastened. He traced his way by the grotesque fungi, which always seem better nourished as one approaches the dread circle, where elder beings danced and sacrificed. Finally, the great light of those thicker fungi revealed a sinister green and gray vastness pushing up through the roof of the forest and out of sight. This was the nearest of the great ring of stones, and Carter knew he was close to the Zoog village. Renewing his fluttering sound, he waited patiently, and was at last rewarded by an impression of many eyes watching him. It was the Zoogs, for one sees their weird eyes long before one can discern their small, slippery brown outlines. Out they swarmed from hidden burrow and honeycomb tree, till the whole dim-litten region was alive with them. Some of the wilder ones brushed Carter unpleasantly, and one even nipped loathsomely at his ear, but these lawless spirits were soon restrained by their elders. The Council of Sages, recognizing the visitor, offered a gourd of fermented sap from a haunted tree unlike the others, which had grown from a seed dropped down by someone on the moon, and as Carter drank it ceremoniously, a very strange colloquy began. Rumors of the Great Ones came equally from all points, and one might only say that they were likelier to be seen on high mountain peaks than in valleys, since on such peaks they dance reminiscently when the moon is above and the clouds beneath. Then one very ancient Zoog recalled a thing unheard of by the others, and said that in Ultar, beyond the river sky, there still lingered the last copy of those inconceivably old narcotic manuscripts made by waking men in forgotten boreal kingdoms, and borne into the land of dreams when the hairy cannibal Nofkas overcame many-templed Olato, and slew all the heroes of the land of Lamar. Those manuscripts, he said, told much of the gods, and besides, in Ultar there were men who had seen the signs of the gods, and even one old priest who had scaled a great mountain to behold them dancing by moonlight. He had failed, though his companion had succeeded, and perished namelessly. So Randolph Carter thanked the Zoogs, who fluttered amicably and gave him another gourd of moon-tree wine to take with him, and set out through the phosphorescent wood for the other side, where the rushing sky flows down from the slopes of Larion and Hattag, and Nir and Ultar dot the plain. Behind him, furtive and unseen, crept several of the curious Zoogs, for they wished to learn what might befall him and bear back the legend to their people. The vast oaks grew thicker as he pushed on beyond the village, and he looked sharply for a certain spot where they would thin somewhat, standing quite dead or dying among the unnaturally dense fungi and the rotting mold and mushy logs of their fallen brothers. There he would turn sharply aside, for at that spot a mighty slab of stone rests on the forest floor, and those who have dared approach it say that it bears an iron ring 3 feet wide. Remembering the archaic circle of great mossy rocks, and what it was possibly set up for, the Zoogs do not pause near that expansive slab with its huge ring, for they realize that all which is forgotten need not necessarily be dead, and they would not like to see the slab rise slowly and deliberately. Carter detoured to the proper place, and heard behind him the frightened fluttering of some of the more timid Zoogs. He had known they would follow him, so he was not disturbed, for one grows accustomed to the anomalies of these prying creatures. It was twilight when he came to the edge of the wood, and the strengthening glow told him it was the twilight of morning. Over fertile plains, rolling down to the sky, he saw the smoke of cottage chimneys, and on every hand were the hedges and plowed fields and thatched roofs of a peaceful land. Once he had stopped at a farmhouse well for a cup of water, and all the dogs barked affrightedly at the inconspicuous Zoogs that crept through the grass behind. At another house, where people were stirring, he asked questions about the gods, and whether they danced upon Larian, but the farmer and his wile would only make the elder sign and tell him the way to Nir and Ultar. At noon he walked through the one broad high street of Nir, which he had once visited and which marked his farthest former travels in this direction, and soon afterward he came to the great stone bridge across the sky, into whose central piece the masons had sealed a living human sacrifice when they built it 1,300 years before. Once on the other side, the frequent presence of cats, who all arched their backs at the trailing Zoogs, revealed the near neighbor of Ultar. For in Ultar, according to an ancient and significant law, no man may kill a cat. Very pleasant were the suburbs of Ultar, with their little green cottages and neatly fenced farms, and still pleasanter was the quaint town itself, with its old peaked roofs and overhanging upper stories and numberless chimney pots and narrow hill streets where one can see old cobbles wherever the graceful cats afford space enough. Carter, the cats being somewhat dispersed by the half-seen Zoogs, picked his way directly to the modest temple of the Elder Ones, where the priests and old records were said to be, and once within that venerable circular tower of ivied stone which crowns Ultar's highest hill, he sought out the patriarch, Atal, who had been up the forbidden peak, Katagkia, in the stony desert, and had come down again, alive. Atal, seated on an ivory dais, in a festooned shrine at the top of the temple, was fully 3 centuries old, but still very keen of mind and memory. From him Carter learned many things about the gods, but mainly that they were indeed only Earth's gods, ruling feebly over our dreamland and having no power or habitation elsewhere. They might, Atal said, heed a man's prayer if in good humor, but one must not think of climbing to their onyx stronghold atop Kadath in the cold waste. It was lucky that no man knew where Kadath towers, for the fruits of ascending it would be very grave. The Tull's companion, Bani the Wise, had been drawn screaming into the sky for climbing nearly the known peak of Hatagkia. Tull's companion, Bani the Wise, had been drawn screaming into the sky for climbing nearly the known peak of Katagkia. With unknown Kadath, if ever found, matters would be much worse. For although Earth's gods may sometimes be surpassed by a wise mortal, they are protected by the other gods from outside, whom it is better not to discuss. At least twice in the world's history, the other gods set their seal upon Earth's primal granite, once in antediluvian times, as guessed from a drawing in those parts of the Nakhotic manuscripts too ancient to be read, and once on Hatagkia, where Barzai the Wise tried to see Earth's gods dancing by moonlight. So, Atal said, it would be much better to let all gods alone, except in tactful prayers. Carter, though disappointed by Atol's discouraging advice and by the meager help to be found in the Nakhotic manuscripts and the 7 cryptical books of Hassan, did not wholly despair. First, he questioned the old priest about the marvelous sunset city seen from the railed terrace, thinking that perhaps he might find it without the god's aid, but Atol could tell him nothing. Probably, Atal said, The place belonged to his especial dream world, and not to the general land of vision that many know, and conceivably it might be on another planet. In that case, Earth's gods could not guide him if they would. But this was not likely, since the stopping of the dream showed pretty clearly that it was something the Great Ones wished to hide from him. Then Carter did a wicked thing, offering his guileless host so many draughts of the moon wine which the Zoogs had given him that the old man became irresponsibly talkative. Robbed of his reserve, poor Atal babbled freely of forbidden things, telling of a great image reported by travelers as carved on the solid rock of the mountain Ingranek, on the Isle of Oraib in the southern sea, and hinting that it may be a likeness which Earth's gods once wrought of their own features in the days when they danced by moonlight on that mountain. And he hiccuped likewise that the features of that image are very strange, so that one might easily recognize them, and that they are sure signs of the authentic race of the gods. Now, the use of all this in finding the gods became at once apparent to Carter. It is known that in disguise the younger among the great ones often espouse the daughters of men, so that around the borders of the cold waste wherein stands Kadath, the peasants must all bear their blood. This being so, the way to find that waste must be to see the stone face in Ingranek, and mark the features. Then, having noted them with care, to search for such features among living men. Where they are plainest and thickest, there must be gods dwell nearest, and whatever stony waste lies at the back of the villages in that place must be that wherein stands Kadath. Much of the great old ones might be learnt in such regions, and those with their blood might inherit little memories very useful to a seeker. They might not know their parentage, for the gods so dislike to be known among men that none can be found who has seen their faces wittingly, a thing which Carter realized even as he sought to scale Kadath. But they would have queer, lofty thoughts misunderstood by their fellows, and would sing of far places and gardens so unlike any known even in the dreamland, that common folk would call them fools. And from all this, one could perhaps learn old secrets of Kadath, or gain hints of the marvelous sunset city which the gods held secret. And more, one might in certain cases seize some well-loved child of a god as hostage, or even capture some young god himself, disguised and dwelling amongst men with a comely peasant maiden as his bride. Atal, however, did not know how to find Ingranek on the Isle of Oraib, and recommended that Carter follow the singing sky under its bridges down to the southern sea, where no burgess of Ultar has ever been, but whence the merchants come in boats, or with long caravans of mules and two-wheeled carts. There is a great city there, Dylath-Leen, but in Ultar its reputation is bad because of the black three-banked galleys that sail to it with rubies from no clearly named shore. The traders that come from those galleys to deal with the jewelers are human, or nearly so, but the rowers are never beheld, and it is not thought wholesome in Ultar that merchants should trade with the black ships from unknown places whose rowers cannot be exhibited. By the time he had given this information, Atal was very drowsy, and Carter laid him gently on a couch of inlaid ebony, and gathered his long beard decorously on his chest. As he turned to go, he observed that not so suppressed fluttering followed him, and wondered why the Zoogs had become so lax in their curious pursuit. Then he noticed all the sleek, complacent cats of Ultar licking their chops with unusual gusto, and recalled the spitting and caterwauling he had faintly heard in lower parts of the temple while absorbed in the old priest's conversation. He recalled, too, the evilly hungering way in which an especially impudent young Zoog had regarded a small black kitten in the cobbled streets outside. And because he loved nothing on earth more than black kittens, he stooped and petted the sleek cats of Ultar as they licked their chops and did not mourn because those inquisitive Zoogs would escort him no farther. It was sunset now, so Carter stopped at an ancient inn on a steep little street overlooking the lower town. As he went out on the balcony of his room and gazed down at the sea of red tiled roofs and cobbled ways and the pleasant fields beyond, all mellow and magical in the slanted light, he swore that Ultar would be a very likely place to dwell in always, were not the memory of a greater sunset city ever goading one onward towards unknown perils. Then twilight fell, and the pink walls of the plastered gables turned violet and mystic, and little yellow lights floated up one by one from old lattice windows, and sweet bells pealed in the temple tower above, and the first star winked softly above the meadows across the sky. With the night came song, and Carter nodded as the lutanists praised ancient days from beyond the filigreed balconies and tessellated courts of simple Ultar. And there might have been sweetness even in the voices of Ultar's many cats, but they were mostly heavy and silent from strange feasting. Some of them stole off to those cryptical realms which are known only to cats and which villagers say are on the moon's dark side, whither the cats leap from tall housetops. But one small black kitten crept upstairs and sprang in Carter's lap to purr and play, and curled up near his feet when he lay down at last on the little couch whose pillows were stuffed with fragrant, drowsy herbs. In the morning, Carter joined a caravan of merchants bound for Dylath-Leen, with the spun wool of Ultar and the cabbages of Ultar's busy farms. And for 6 days they rode with tinkling bells on the smooth road beside the sky, stopping some nights at the inns of little quaint fishing towns, and on other nights camping under the stars while snatches of boatmen's songs came from the placid river. The country was very beautiful, with green hedges and groves and picturesque peaked cottages and octagonal windmills. On the 7th day, a blur of smoke rose on the horizon ahead, and then the tall black towers of Dylath-Leen, which is built mostly of basalt. Dylath-Leen, with its thin angular towers, looks in the distance like a bit of the Giant's Causeway, and its streets are dark and uninviting. There are many dismal sea taverns near the myriad wharves, and all the town is thronged with the strange seamen of every land on earth, and of a few which are said to be not on earth. Carter questioned the oddly robed men of that city about the peak of Ingrenek on the Isle of Oriab, and found that they knew of it well. Ships came from Baharna on that isle, one being due to return thither in only a month, and Ingrenek is but 2 days' zebra ride from that point. But few had seen the stone face of the god, which overlooks only sheer crags and a valley of sinister lava. Once the gods were angered with men on that side, and spoke of the matter to the other gods. It was hard to get this information from the traders and sailors in Dylath-Leen's sea taverns, because they mostly preferred to whisper of the black galleys. One of them was due in a week with rubies from its unknown shore, and the townsfolk dreaded to see it dock. The mouths of the men who came from it to trade were too wide, and the way their turbans were humped up in 2 points above their foreheads was in especially bad taste. And their shoes were the shortest and queerest thing ever seen in the 6 kingdoms. But worst of all was the matter of the unseen rowers. Those 3 banks of oars moved too briskly and accurately and vigorously to be comfortable, and it was not right for a ship to stay in port for weeks while the merchants traded, yet to give no glimpse of its crew. It was not fair to the tavern keepers of Dylath-Leen, or to the grocers and butchers either, for not a scrap of provisions were ever sent aboard. The merchants took only gold and stout black slaves from Parg across the river. That was all they ever took, those unpleasantly featured merchants and their unseen rowers. never anything from the butchers and grocers, but only gold, and the fat black men of Parg, whom they bought by the pound. And the odors from those galleys which the south wind blew in from the wharves are not to be described. Only by constantly smoking strong fag-weed could even the hardiest denizens of the old sea taverns bear them. Dylath-Leen would never have tolerated the black galleys had such rubies been obtainable elsewhere, but no mine in all of Barth's dreamland was known to produce their like. Of all these things, Dylath-Leen's cosmopolitan folk chiefly gossiped, while Carter waited patiently for the ship from Baharna, which might bear him to the isle whereon carven Ingrenek towers lofty and barren. Meanwhile, he did not fail to seek through the haunts of far travelers for any tales they might have concerning Kadath in the cold waste, or a marvelous city of marble walls and silver fountains seen below terraces in the sunset. Of these things, however, he learned nothing, though he once thought that a certain old slant-eyed merchant looked queerly intelligent when the cold waste was spoken of. This man was reputed to trade with the horrible stone villages on the icy desert plateaus of Leng, which no healthy folk visit, and whose evil fires are seen at night from afar. He was even rumored to have dealt with that high priest not to be described, which wears a yellow silken mask over its face, and dwells all alone in a prehistoric stone monastery. That such a person might well have had nibbling traffic with such beings as may conceivably dwell in that cold waste was not to be doubted, but Carter soon found that it was no use questioning him. Then the black galley slipped into the harbor past the basalt whale and the tall lighthouse, silent and alien, and with a strange stench that the south wind drove into the town. Uneasiness rustled through the taverns along the waterfront, and after a while the dark, wide-mouthed merchants with humped turbans and short feet clumped stealthily ashore to seek the bazaars of the jewelers. Carter observed them closely and disliked them more the longer he looked at them. Then he saw them drive the stout black men of Parg up the gangplank, grunting and sweating, into that singular galley, and wondered in what lands, or if even any lands at all, those fat, pathetic creatures might be destined to serve. And on the third evening of that galley stay, one of the uncomfortable merchants spoke to him, smirking sinfully and hinting of what he had heard in the taverns of Carter's quest. He appeared to have knowledge too secret for public telling, and although the sound of his voice was unbearably hateful, Carter felt that the lore of so far a traveler must not be overlooked. He bade him, therefore, be his guest in locked chambers above, and drew out the last of the Zoog's moon wine to loosen his tongue. The strange merchant drank heavily, but smirked unchanged by the draught. Then he drew forth a curious bottle with wine of his own, and Carter saw that the bottle was a single hollowed-out ruby, grotesquely carved in patterns too fabulous to be comprehended. He offered his wine to his host, and though Carter took only the least sip, he felt the dizziness of space and the fever of unimagined jungles. All the while the guest had been smiling more and more broadly, and as Carter slipped into blankness, the last thing he saw was that dark, odious face convulsed with evil laughter, and something quite unspeakable where one of the two frontal puffs of that orange turban had become disarranged with the shakings of that epileptic mirth. Carter next had consciousness amidst horrible odors beneath a tent-like awning on the deck of a ship, with the marvelous coasts of the southern sea flying by in unnatural swiftness. He was not chained, but three of the dark, sardonic merchants stood grinning nearby, and the sight of those humps in their turbans made him almost as faint as did the stench that filtered up through the sinister hatches. He saw slip past him the glorious lands and cities of which a fellow dreamer of earth, a lighthouse keeper in ancient Kingsport, had often discoursed in the old days, and recognized the templed terraces of Zak, abode of forgotten dreams, the spires of infamous Thalarion, that Daemon city of 1,000 wonders, where the Eidolon Lathi reigns, the charnel gardens of Zura, land of pleasures unattained, and the twin headlands of crystal meeting above in a resplendent arch, which guard the harbor of Sona Nil, blessed land of fancy. Past all these gorgeous lands, the malodorous ship flew unwholesomely, urged by the abnormal strokes of those unseen rowers below. And before the day was done, Carter saw that the steersman could have no other goal than the basalt pillars of the west, beyond which simple folk say splendid Caturia lies, but which wise dreamers well know are the gates of a monstrous cataract, wherein the oceans of earth's dreamland drop wholly to abysmal nothingness, and shoot through the empty spaces toward the other worlds and other stars, and the awful voids outside the ordered universe, where the Daemon Sultan Azathoth gnaws hungrily in chaos, amid pounding and piping and the hellish dancing of the other gods, blind, voiceless, tenebrous, and mindless, with their soul and messenger, Nyarlathotep. Meanwhile, the three sardonic merchants would give no word of their intent, though Carter knew well that they must be leagued with those who wished to hold him from his quest. It is understood in the land of dreams that the other gods have many agents moving among men, and all these agents, whether whom wholly human or slightly less than human, are eager to work the will of those blind and mindless things in return for the favor of their hideous soul and messenger, the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. So Carter inferred that the merchants of the humped turbans, hearing of his daring search for the great ones in their castle of Kadath, had decided to take him away and deliver him to Nyarlathotep, or whatever nameless bounty might be offered for such a prize. What might be the land of those merchants in our known universe, or in the eldritch spaces outside, Carter could not guess, nor could he imagine at what hellish trysting place they would meet the crawling chaos to give him up and claim their reward. He knew, however, that no beings as nearly human as these would dare approach the ultimate knighted throne of the Daemon Azathoth in the formless central void. At the set of the sun, the merchants licked their excessively wide lips and glared hungrily, and one of them went below and returned from some hidden and offensive cabin with a pot and basket of plates. Then they squatted close together beneath the awning and ate the smoking meat that was passed around. But when they gave Carter a portion, he found something very terrible in the size and shape of it, so that he turned even paler than before and cast that portion into the sea when no eye was on him. And again he thought of those unseen rowers beneath, and of the suspicious nourishment from which their far too mechanical strength was derived. It was dark when the galley passed betwixt the basalt pillars of the west, and the sound of the ultimate cataract swelled portentous from ahead. And the spray of that cataract rose to obscure the stars, and the deck grew damp, and the vessel reeled in the surging current of the brink. Then, with a queer whistle and plunge, the leap was taken, and Carter felt the terrors of nightmare as earth fell away, and the great boat shot silent and comet-like into planetary space. Never before had he known what shapeless black things lurk and caper and flounder all through the aether, leering and grinning at such voyagers as may pass, and sometimes feeling about with slimy paws when some moving object excites their curiosity. These are the nameless larvae of the other gods, and like them are blind and without mind, and possessed of singular hungers and thirsts. But that offensive galley did not aim as far as Carter had feared, for he soon saw the helmsman was steering a course directly for the moon. The moon was a crescent, shining larger and larger as they approached it, and shewing its singular craters and peaks uncomfortably. The ship made for the edge, and it soon became clear that its destination was that secret and mysterious side which is always turned away from the earth, and which no fully human person, save perhaps the dreamer Sneer-at-Co, has ever beheld. The close aspect of the moon as the galley drew near proved very disturbing to Carter, and he did not like the size and shape of the ruins which crumbled here and there. The dead temples on the mountains were so placed that they could have glorified no suitable or wholesome gods, and in the symmetries of the broken columns there seemed to be some dark and inner meaning which did not invite solution. And what the structure and proportions of the olden worshippers could have been, Carter steadily refused to conjecture. When the ship rounded the edge and sailed over those lands unseen by man, there appeared in the queer landscape certain signs of life, and Carter saw many low, broad, round cottages and fields of grotesque whitish fungi. He noticed that these cottages had no windows, and thought that their shape suggested the huts of Eskimo. Then he glimpsed the oily waves of a sluggish sea, and knew that the voyage was once more to be by water, or at least through some liquid. The galley struck the surface with a peculiar sound, and the odd elastic way the waves received it was very perplexing to Carter. They now slid along at great speed, once passing and hailing another galley of kindred form, but generally seeing nothing but the curious sea and a sky that was black and star-strewn, even though the sun shone scorchingly in it. There presently rose ahead the jagged hills of a leprous-looking coast, and Carter saw the thick, unpleasant great towers of a city. The way they leaned and bent, the manner in which they were clustered, and the fact that they had no windows at all, was very disturbing to the prisoner, and he bitterly mourned the folly which had made him sip the curious wine of that merchant with the humped turban. As the coast drew nearer, and the hideous stench of that city grew stronger, he saw upon the jagged hills many forests, some of whose trees he recognized as akin to that solitary moon tree in the enchanted wood of earth, from whose sap the small brown zoogs fermented their curious wine. I believe that I did read the paragraph here previous to this, but I'll be sure of that. They now slid along at great speed, once passing and hailing another galley of kindred form, but generally seeing nothing but the curious sea and a sky that was black and star-strewn, even though the sun shone scorchingly in it. Carter could now distinguish moving figures on the noisome wharves ahead, and the better he saw them, the worse he began to fear and detest them. For they were not men at all, or even approximately men, but great grayish-white slippery things which could expand and contract at will, and whose principal shape, though it often changed, was that of a sort of toad without any eyes, but with a curious vibrating mass of short pink tentacles on the end of its blunt, vague snout. These objects were waddling busily about the wharves, moving bales and crates and boxes with preternatural strength, and now and then hopping on or off some anchored galley with long oars in their forepaws. And now and then one would appear driving a herd of clumping slaves, which indeed were approximate human beings with wide mouths, like those merchants who traded in Dylath-Leen. Only these herds, being without turbans or shoes or clothing, did not seem so very human at all. Some of the slaves, the fatter ones, whom a sort of overseer would pinch experimentally, were unloaded from ships and nailed in crates, which workers pushed into the low warehouses or loaded on great lumbering vans. Once a van was hitched and driven off, and the fabulous thing which drew it was such that Carter gasped, even after having seen the other monstrosities of that hateful place. Now and then, a small herd of slaves, dressed and turbaned like the dark merchants, would be driven aboard a galley, followed by a great crew of the slippery toad things as officers, navigators, and rowers. And Carter saw that the almost human creatures were reserved for the more ignominious kinds of servitude, which required no strength, such as steering and cooking, fetching and carrying, and bargaining with men on the earth or other planets where they traded. These creatures must have been convenient on earth, for they were truly not unlike men when dressed and carefully shod and turbaned, and could haggle in the shops of men without embarrassment or curious explanations. But most of them, unless lean or ill-favored, were unclothed and packed in crates and drawn off in lumbering lorries by fabulous things. Occasionally, other beings were unloaded and crated, some very like these semi-humans, some not so similar, and some not similar at all. And he wondered if any of the poor, stout black men of Parg were left to be unloaded and crated and shipped inland in those obnoxious drays. When the galley landed at a greasy-looking quay of spongy rock, a nightmare horde of toad things wiggled out of the hatches, and two of them seized Carter and dragged him ashore. The smell and aspect of that city are beyond telling, and Carter held only scattered images of the tiled streets and black doorways and endless precipices of gray vertical walls without windows. At length, he was dragged within a low doorway and made to climb infinite steps in pitch blackness. It was apparently all one to the toad things whether it were light or dark. The odor of the place was intolerable, and when Carter was locked into a chamber and left alone, he scarcely had strength to crawl around and ascertain its form and dimensions. It was circular and about 20 feet across. From then on, time ceased to exist. At intervals, food was pushed in, but Carter would not touch it. What his fate would be, he did not know, but he felt that he was held for the coming of that frightful soul and messenger of infinity's other gods, the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. Finally, after an unguessed span of hours or days, the great stone door swung wide again, and Carter was shoved down the stairs and out into the red-lit streets of that fearsome city. It was night on the moon, and all through the town were stationed slaves bearing torches. In a detestable square, a sort of procession was formed. 10 of the toad things and 24 almost human torchbearers, 11 on either side, and one each before and behind. Carter was placed in the middle of the line, 5 toad things ahead and 5 behind, and one almost human torchbearer on either side of him. Certain of the toad things produced disgustingly carven flutes of ivory and made loathsome sounds. To that hellish piping, the column advanced out of the tiled streets and into nighted plains of obscene fungi, soon commencing to climb one of the lower and more gradual hills that lay behind the city. That on some frightful slope or blasphemous plateau the crawling chaos waited, Carter could not doubt, and he wished that the suspense might soon be over. The whining of those impious flutes was shocking, and he would have given worlds for even half-normal sound. But these toad things had no voices, and the slaves did not talk. Then, through the star-specked darkness, there did come a normal sound. It rolled from the higher hills, and from all the jagged peaks around it was caught up and echoed in the swelling pandemoniac chorus. It was the midnight yell of the cat, and Carter knew at last that the old village folk were right when they made low guesses about the cryptical realms which are known only to cats and to which the elders among cats repair by stealth nocturnally, springing from high housetops. Verily, it is to the moon's dark side that they go to leap and gambol on the hills and converse with ancient shadows, and here amidst that column of fetid things Carter heard their homely, friendly cry, and thought of the steep roofs and warm hearths and little lighted windows of home. Now much of the speech of cats was known to Randolph Carter, and in this far terrible place he uttered the cry that was suitable. But that he need not have done, for even as his lips opened, he heard the chorus wax and draw nearer, and saw swift shadows against the stars as graceful shapes leaped from hill to hill in gathering legions. The call of the clan had been given, and before the foul procession had time even to be frightened, a cloud of smothering fur and a phalanx of murderous claws were tidily and tempestuously upon it. The flute stopped, and there were shrieks in the night. Dying, almost humans screamed, and cats spit and yowled and roared, but the toad things made never a sound as their stinking green ichor oozed fatally upon that porous earth with the obscene fungi. It was a stupendous sight while the torches lasted, and Carter had never before seen so many cats. Black, gray, and white, yellow, tiger, and mixed, common, Persian, and Marex, Tibetan, Angora, and Egyptian, all were there in the fury of battle, and there hovered over them some trace of that profound and inviolate sanctity which made their goddess great in the temples of Bubastis. They would leap 7 strong at the throat of an almost human, or the pink tentacled snout of a toad thing, and drag it down savagely to the fungus plain, where myriads of their fellows would surge over it and into it with the frenzied claws and teeth of a divine battle fury. Carter had seized a torch from a stricken slave, but was soon overborne by the surging waves of his loyal defenders. Then he lay in the utter blackness, hearing the clangor of war and the shouts of the victors, and feeling the soft paws of his friends as they rushed to and fro over him in the fray. At last, awe and exhaustion closed his eyes, and when he opened them again it was upon a strange scene. The great shining disk of the earth, 13 times greater than that of the moon as we see it, had risen with floods of weird light over the lunar landscape, and across all those leagues of wild plateau and wild crest there squatted one endless sea of cats in orderly array. Circle on circle they reached, and 2 or 3 leaders out of the ranks were licking his face and purring to him consolingly. Of the dead slaves and toad things there were not many signs, but Carter thought he saw one bone a little way off in the open space between him and the warriors. Carter now spoke with the leaders in the soft language of cats, and learned that his ancient friendship with the species was well known and often spoken of in the places where cats congregate. He had not been unmarked in Ultar when he passed through, and the sleek old cats had remembered how he patted them after they had attended to the hungry Zoogs who looked evilly at a small black kitten. And they recalled, too, how he had welcomed the very little kitten who had came to see him at the inn, and how he had given it a saucer of rich cream in the morning before he left. The grandfather of that very little kitten was the leader of the army now assembled, for he had seen the evil procession from a far hill, and recognized the prisoner as a sworn friend of his kind on earth and in the land of dream. A yowl now came from the further peak, and the old leader paused abruptly in conversation. It was one of the army's outposts, stationed on the highest of the mountains to watch the one foe which Earth's cats fear, the very large and peculiar cats from Saturn, who for some reason have not been oblivious of the charm of our moon's dark side. They are leagued by treaty with the evil toad things, and are notoriously hostile to our earthly cats, so that at this juncture a meeting would have been a somewhat grave matter. After a brief consultation of generals, the cats rose and assumed a closer formation, crowding protectingly around Carter, and preparing to take the great leap through space back to the housetops of Earth and its dreamland. The old field marshal advised Carter to let himself be borne along smoothly and passively in the massed ranks of furry leapers, and told him how to spring when the rest sprang, and land gracefully when the rest landed. He also offered to deposit him in any spot he desired, and Carter decided on the city of Dylath-Leen, whence the Black Galley had set out, for he wished to sail thence for Oriab and the carven crest Ingranek, and also to warn people of the city to have no more traffic with black galleys if indeed that traffic could be tactfully and judiciously broken off. Then, upon a signal, the cats all leaped gracefully with their friend and packed securely in their midst, while in a black cave on an unhallowed summit of the Moon Mountains still vainly waited the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. The leap of the cats through space was very swift, and being surrounded by his companions, Carter did not see this time and the great black shapelessness that lurk and caper and flounder in the abyss. Before he fully realized what had happened, he was back in his familiar room at the inn of Dylath-Leen, and the stealthy, friendly cats were pouring out of the window in streams. The old leader from Ultar was the last to leave, and as Carter shook his paw, he said he would be able to get home by cockcrow. When dawn came, Carter went downstairs and learned that a week had elapsed since his capture and leaving. There was still nearly a fortnight to wait for the ship bound towards Oribe, and during that time he said what he could against the black galleys and their infamous ways. Most of the townsfolk believed him, yet so fond were the jewelers of great rubies that none would wholly promise to cease trafficking with the wide-mouthed merchants. If aught of evil ever befalls Dylath-Leen through such traffic, it will not be his fault. In about a week, the desiderate ship put in by the Black Whale and Tall Lighthouse, and Carter was glad to see that she was a bark of wholesome men, with painted sides and yellow lateen sails and a gray captain in silken robes. Her cargo was the fragrant resin of Oribe's inner groves and the delicate pottery baked by the artists of Bahama and the strange little figures carved from Ingranek's ancient lava. For this they were paid in the wool of Ultar and the iridescent textiles of Hatek and the ivory that the black men carve across the river in Parg. Carter made arrangements with the captain to go to Barna and was told that the voyage would take 10 days. And during his week of waiting, he talked much with that captain of Ingranek, and was told that very few had seen the carven faces thereon, but that most travelers are content to learn its legends from old people and lava-gatherers and image-makers in Barna, and afterwards say in their far homes that they have indeed beheld it. The captain was not even sure that any person now living had beheld that carven face, for the wrong side of Ingranek is very difficult and barren and sinister, and there are rumors of caves near the peak wherein dwell the night gaunts. But the captain did not wish to say just what a night gaunt might be like, since such cattle are known to haunt most persistently the dreams of those who think too often of them. Then Carter asked the captain about unknown Kadath and the cold waste, and the marvelous sunset city, but of these the good man could truly tell nothing. Carter sailed out of Dylath-Leen one early morning when the tide turned, and saw the first rays of sunrise on the thin angular towers of that dismal basalt town, and for 2 days they sailed eastward in sight of green coasts, and saw often the pleasant fishing towns that climbed up steeply, with their red roofs and chimney pots, from old dreaming wharves and beaches where nets lay drying. But on the 3rd day they turned sharply south, where the roll of waters was stronger, and soon passed from sight of any land. On the 5th day the sailors were nervous, but the captain apologized for their fears, saying that the ship was about to pass over the weedy walls and broken columns of a sunken city too old for memory, and that when the water was clear one could see so many moving shadows in that deep place that simple folk disliked it. He admitted, moreover, that many ships had been lost in that part of the sea, having been hailed when quite close to it, but never seen again. That night the moon was very bright, and one could see a great way down in the water. There was so little wind that the ship could not move much, and the ocean was very calm. Looking over the rail, Carter saw many fathoms deep the dome of the great temple, and in front of it an avenue of unnatural sphinxes, leading to what was once a public square. Dolphins sported merrily in and out of the ruins, and porpoises reveled clumsily here and there, sometimes coming to the surface and leaping clear out of the sea. As the ship drifted on, a little floor of the ocean rose in hills, and one could clearly mark the lines of ancient climbing streets and the washed-down walls of myriad little houses. Then the suburbs appeared, and finally a great lone building on a hill of simpler architecture than the other structures and in much better repair. It was dark and low, and covered four sides of a square, with a tower at each corner, a paved court in the center, and small curious round windows all over it. Probably it was of basalt, the weeds draped the greater part, and such was its lonely and impressive place on that far hill that it may have been a temple or a monastery. Some phosphorescent fish inside it gave the small round windows an aspect of shining, and Carter did not blame the sailors for their fears. Then, by the watery moonlight, he noticed an odd high monolith in the middle of that central court, and saw that something was tied to it. And when after getting a telescope from the captain's cabin, he saw that that bound thing was a sailor in the silk robes of Oriab, head downward and without any eyes. He was glad that a rising breeze soon took the ship ahead to more healthy parts of the sea. The next day they spoke with the ship with violet sails bound for Zar in the land of forgotten realms, with bulbs of strange-colored lilies for cargo. And on the evening of the 11th day they came in sight of the Isle of Oriab with Ngranek rising jagged and snow-crowned in the distance. Oriab is a very great isle, and its port of Bahama a mighty city. The wharves of Bahama are of porphyry, and the city rises in great stone terraces behind them, having streets of steps that are frequently arched over by buildings and the bridges between buildings. There is a great canal which goes underneath the whole city in a tunnel, with granite gates, and leads to the inland lake of Yath, on whose farther shore are the vast clay-brick ruins of a primal city, whose name is not remembered. As the ship drew into the harbor at evening, the twin beacons, Thon and Thal, gleamed a welcome, and in all the million windows of Bahama's terraces mellow lights peeped out quietly and gradually as the stars peep out overhead in the dusk, till that steep and climbing seaport became a glittering constellation, hung between the stars of heaven and the reflections of those stars in the still harbor. The captain, after landing, made Carter a guest in his own small house on the shores of Yath, where the rear of the town slopes down to it, and his wife and servants brought strange, toothsome foods for the traveller's delight. And in the days after that, Carter asked for rumors and legends of Ingranek in all the taverns and public places where lava-gatherers and image-makers meet, but could find no one who had been up the higher slopes or seen the carven face. Ingranek was a hard mountain, with only an accursed valley behind it, and besides, one could never depend on the certainty that night gods are altogether fabulous. When the captain sailed back to Dylath-Leen, Carter took quarters in an ancient tavern opening on an alley of steps in the original part of the town, which is built out of brick and resembles the ruins of Yacht's further shore. Here he laid the plans for the ascent of Ingranek, and correlated all that he had learned from the lava-gatherers about the roads thither. The keeper of the tavern was a very old man, and had learned so many legends that he was a great help. He even took Carter to an upper room in that ancient house, and shewed him a crude picture, which a traveler had scrawled on the clay wall in the old days, where men were bolder and less reluctant to visit Ingranek's higher slopes. The old tavern-keeper's great-grandfather had heard from his great-grandfather that the traveler who scratched that picture had climbed Ingranek and seen the carven face, here drawing it for others to behold. But Carter had very great doubts, since the large rough features on the wall were hasty and careless, and wholly overshadowed by a crowd of little companion shapes in the worst possible taste, with horns and wings and claws and curling tails. At last, having gained all information he was likely to gain in the taverns and public places of Barna, Carter hired a zebra and set out one morning on the road by Yacht's shore for those inland parts wherein towers stony Ingranek. On his right were rolling hills and pleasant orchards and neat little stone farmhouses, and he was much reminded of those fertile fields that flank the sky. By evening, he was near the nameless ancient ruins on Yacht's farther shore, and though old lava-gatherers had warned him not to camp there at night, he tethered his zebra to a curious pillar before a crumbling wall and laid his blanket in a sheltered corner beneath some carvings whose meaning none could decipher. Around him he wrapped another blanket, for the nights are cold in Orib, and when upon waking once, he thought he felt the wings of some insect brushing his face. He covered his head altogether and slept in peace till roused by the maga birds in distant resin groves. The sun had just come up over the great slope, whereon leagues of primal brick foundations and worn walls and occasional cracked pillars and pedestals stretched down desolate to the shore of Yacht, and Carter looked about for his tethered zebra. Great was his dismay to see that docile beast stretched prostrate beside the curious pillar to which it had been tied, and still greater was he vexed on finding that the steed was quite dead, with its blood all sucked away through a singular wound in its throat. His pack had been disturbed, and several shiny knickknacks taken away, and all round on the dusty soil were great webbed footprints, for which he could not in any way account. The legends and warnings of lava-gatherers occurred to him, and he thought of what had brushed his face in the night. Then he shouldered his pack and strode on toward Ingranek, though not without a shiver, when he saw close to him, as the highway passed through the ruins, a great gaping arch low in the wall of an old temple, with steps leading down into darkness, farther than he could peer. His course now lay uphill, through wilder and partly wooded country, and he saw only the huts of charcoal burners and the camp of those who gathered resin from the groves. The whole air was fragrant with balsam, and all the maga birds sang blithely as they flashed their 7 colors in the sun. Near sunset, he came upon a new camp of lava-gatherers returning with laden sacks from Ingranek's lower slopes, and here he also camped, listening to the songs and tales of the men and overhearing what they had whispered about a companion they had lost. He had climbed high to reach a mass of fine lava above him, and at nightfall did not return to his fellows. When they looked for him the next day, they found only his turban, nor was there any sign on the crags below that he had fallen. They did not search any more, because the old man among them said that it would be of no use. No one ever found what the night gaunts took, though those beasts themselves were so uncertain as to be almost fabulous. Carter asked them if night gaunts sucked blood and liked shiny things and left webbed footprints, but they all shook their heads negatively and seemed frightened at his making such an inquiry. When he saw how taciturn they had become, he asked them no more, but went to sleep in his blanket. The next day he rose with the lava-gatherers and exchanged farewells as they rode west, and he rode east on a zebra he bought of them. Their older men gave him blessings and warnings, and told him he had better not climb too high on Ingranek, but while he thanked them heartily, he was in no wise dissuaded, for still did he feel that he must find the gods on unknown Kadath, and win from them a way to that haunting and marvelous city in the sunset. By noon, after a long uphill ride, he came upon some abandoned brick villages of the hill people who had once dwelt thus close to Ingranek and carved images from its smooth lava. Here they had dwelt till the days of the old tavern-keeper's grandfather, but about that time they felt their presence was disliked. Their homes had crept even up the mountain slope, and the higher they built, the more people they would miss when the sun rose. At last, they decided it would be better to leave altogether, since things were sometimes glimpsed in the darkness, which no one could interpret favorably, so in the end all of them went down to the sea and dwelt in Bahama, inhabiting a very old quarter and teaching their sons of the old art of image-making, which to this day they carry on. It was from these children of the exiled hill people that Carter had heard the best tales of Ingranek, when searching through Bahama's ancient taverns. If you are not subscribed, if you have not liked, if you have not shared, I implore you to do all of the algorithmically required business. I hope that it is something that you do find worthy of seeking out not only this, but all of our previous content, and that to come in the future on X or Twitter, Instagram, our Discord, the Threefold at a Factory, or even directly reaching out to us through one of the various other avenues. Things are also posted in Spotify. I'm starting on BitChute, and we are getting shorts finally out on TikTok. If you think that we might be worth supporting in any monetary regard, outside of just your time and your care and your appreciation, we have Stream Elements. If it is something you would like to make a one-time donation for, or if you'd like something in return for the money that you hand us, you could always go over to Patreon, where our most accessible tier, monetarily, is the $5 proponent, where you get such delights as the ability to watch all of the content ad-free and download it for your own personal use, in addition to any of the polls which I might host for details that regards what we might do in the future, what we might go for in terms of direction, and you have the opportunity to have your own section in the Discord server, if you should be so inclined. Not to mention, you will have your name listed here at the end of every single video in the credits. I thank you all for your time. I look forward to the next time. And until then, never miss your opportunities.